All right, it is 10:03, and I'm going to call the meeting to order and do the roll call. Steve Reinhardt.
Here.
Robert Emmerich.
Here.
Doyle Williamson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Brad Phillips.
Here.
Myself, Barbara Evans.
Here.
And Matt Hart is on his way, but okay. And then on to agenda item, oh, wait a minute. The TREIC staff, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, please.
Kristen Warman, Deputy General Counsel.
Mike Malloy, Staff Attorney.
Mark Moore, Standards and Enforcement Services.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs Inspector Liaison.
Gwen Jackson, ELS Division Director.
Okay, and then I'm sorry.
That's okay.
She's usually over here.
I know, I am, exactly. Jennifer Wheeler, Education Manager.
And then any members from the audience that would like to introduce themselves, please, while we're here.
Fred Buck.
Mike Hamill.
And all of you have signed in?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. So agenda item 2, the ratification of the minutes of the July 17th, 2017 meeting. Is there any changes, additions, corrections? Okay, so can we vote on whether to ratify the minutes?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
All righty, thank you. Any against? And agenda item 3, I don't have any of the notifications, but is there any general comments from visitors on non-agenda items? Good morning, Mr. Oldmixon. How are you?
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay, so reports, agenda item 4, reports from subcommittees. And who would like to start first?
Go first. Since we just met, we had a discussion on consideration of standards practice changes that might need to be considered.
And enforcement subcommittee?
You're the chair. I'm training.
I believe you're still chair, aren't you?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I thought Lee was the chair.
Of enforcement?
I'm on it, but I'm not chair. I don't think we've met.
Okay, so.
The education side. Your education, no new action.
Okay, thank you. We'll assume that enforcement has no new action either. I don't think they've
I'm
even
not going to
met.
mess with this.
I don't think so. Who's the chair of enforcement?
I should know that.
I just got.
I sent it to you, and I believe you're not the chair of enforcement, are you?
He's education. I'm
Right.
education.
Right. I think you're still chair of enforcement, right?
I don't believe so, but I'll be
Okay.
glad to meet you.
No, I'll let me pull it up real
I
quick.
didn't bring the copy.
That's okay. Let me pull it up real quick.
We have the official record at some point. We're going to pull up.
Yeah. Hold on. Oh, Lee is.
It is Lee Warren. I said to everybody. Any report?
Jeez, man, you bring more stuff every time we're here.
Absolutely.
Welcome, Matt. And Matt, we are live streaming this meeting, just so everyone knows that. And we have a few people that are on the screen.
And actually, if everyone could just speak up, you don't have to scream, but just speak up so we make sure that we have everyone's voices for the people who are videoing in.
Just as a footnote, whenever enforcement subcommittee comes up, I'm assuming you guys let us know that we need to meet for a purpose.
Well, if you want to set a meeting, we'll attend, of course.
So it's really up to you to call a subcommittee meeting if you have anything that you are in need about with enforcement. I'm assuming that he will tell you if there's something to talk
Yeah, there's no regular meetings on that, so it's only if an issue comes up. If we have an issue we wanted to run by the Enforcement Committee, we'd let you know. Otherwise, it's at y'all's discretion.
If you're talking about cases, lately, like, we've been using Brad as a resource if we have questions about specific cases, like that.
So that is all the reports from the subcommittees. And agenda item 5, staff reports from administration and management services, and then standards and enforcement, and then education and licensing.
I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the engineering thing.
For the AMS report, we wanted to give you an update on our communications with the Board of Professional Engineers. And basically, you may recall from the last meeting that the board had reached out to us about whether or not an inspector is performing engineering services when they're giving an opinion on the foundation in an inspection. We did meet with the staff of the engineering board, and they are working on a draft report because the SOPs only require a visual inspection of the foundation. Their view is that that is not engineering services, and so on that point, that's what they're planning to say in their draft report. They did reach out to us and ask if the members of the inspector committee wanted to be or participate in their stakeholder input process when they discuss that draft opinion with the board, before they push it forward for consideration and adoption by their board. So I told them I would ask you, I would present that to you, and we would let them know.
Didn't we already have an opinion from them from about 10 years ago?
Well, they did not mention that. There was a reference. One of Fred Wilcox, who was part of the exam review committee, mentioned that the engineering board did write an opinion on this exact issue back in the 80s. And so I was going to reach out to them and see if they can dig up that old opinion as well. But I haven't done that since that was just on Friday. So I will do that, and then in terms of getting back to them on whether you want to participate in the process, what is your thought about that? Do you?
I do remember reading something probably 15, 18 years ago about their ruling on it. I don't think I have a copy of it, but the question I had is, in discussion with them, and kind of setting that threshold of being a visual inspection was not considered engineering. Was there discussion on quite a few inspectors that do foundation elevations and add that as part of their basic home inspection, where they're shooting elevations with a zipper level, concrete level, or something like that? Would that go in the line because it's more than a visual? And a lot of inspectors do that.
I think that's probably a good thing we can have in that discussion.
I think that's where we do want
I think
to
that's where you would want to participate in that discussion process, because, we can't speak to what you're doing in your practice. We can only speak to what is required in the SOPs. If an inspector chooses to go above and beyond the SOPs, then that inspector may be crossing over the boundaries into providing engineering services, which would be viewed as an unlicensed activity by that board.
Maybe defining that line. There's a lot of inspectors, and the manufacturers of that equipment do market to home inspectors just to do that.
Well, and their standards do define that line. They have engineering standards that define what is considered engineering services. And as I understood it, I don't know if Doug or Tony have any additional comments, but as I understood the discussion, if you're just doing a visual inspection, then you're not engaging in the practice of engineering. Now, when you start using other tools, I believe that pushes you up a level into their standards where that would be crossing over into the practice of
It might be
engineering.
argued that just doing elevations where you're setting a gauge down and it's telling you half-inch high or low is still visual. And you're not making any recommendations based on that. You're just observing that, well, the house is tilted 4 inches.
But I think the answer to the question is yes, we want to be involved in that conversation, I think, because that's where those details are going to have to come out. I mean, those are valid points, and we need to bring those up. They
Knowing
need to
what
be
guys
clarified.
are doing in the field, that is probably not an uncommon procedure done by inspectors. That
So
might be
would-
construed as.
Would you want to communicate back to them that we are interested in participating, and then you can have them either communicate with me and we can figure out?
Well, they'll want to set up dates for stakeholder meetings, and those will probably be held at their offices. There's the possibility that we could hold one here at our offices. I could talk with them about that, and then have them communicate directly with you on the dates and or through me if that's your preference, whatever.
Is there an offer?
Yes.
Yes.
And would
Is there a state agency here?
Would we form a subcommittee within the inspector committee to be the liaison to them, I think, Tony? Is that how we would want to do that? or-
Well, I think that would fall to you as the chair, to be that liaison, to serve as that liaison. Now, the other members of the committee could certainly come to the stakeholders meeting.
But we don't want to create a quorum of the inspector committee, so.
Correct.
Can't have all
That's where
three.
I'm at with creating a subcommittee. So I guess we need to decide who among the inspector committee is interested in being representing as a subcommittee to this.
I'd be interested.
You
But,
would?
we can draw straws if there's more than.
Yeah.
Would we just get one to go, or do we have a couple to go?
I would say a couple to go, up to 4, but I would say at least 3. Let's say 3.
Let's go, but hopefully can keep.
It may depend on the date.
Right. Well, and that's true. We probably need to hear back where it's going to be and when they want to do it, and we'll throw some dates out and see who wants to participate and who's available.
Yeah, that list would
And
change.
Yeah, exactly. So.
I just noticed the 3 persons that volunteered outside of yourself were all the SOP subcommittee. maybe since it is sort of an
That would
SOP
create a
issue.
quorum for the SOP.
No, there doesn't need, that's not the subject of
Don't have
the
to worry about it.
meetings act. But what I'm saying is, since it is the SOP subcommittee, maybe they can be the ones that sort of are the liaison along with you to the engineer, since it is an SOP issue. I don't want to carve anyone else out. I was just saying I thought it was interesting that the three people who spoke up were all SOP subcommittee members.
Okay. All righty. Well, we'll let's get some dates, and then I guess we'll keep in touch and we'll figure that out. Okay. And next, I suppose is.
Is that all you've got, Kristen?
I guess I did have a question. What are you going to ask them when you go there? Are you going to sit down before you have a meeting and strategize to what you think your boundaries are?
Well, I don't know anything about where we cross over right into if using tools, which now we're compiling data, is then crossing over into the realm of engineering, or if by just walking around a house and looking for visual signs, with cracks and the obvious things that we look for.
I guess my argument would be, you can walk around a house with a level. It doesn't mean you're a structural engineer. But you can do that as a carpenter.
Like a design with it.
Yeah. So why wouldn't you be able to do a level on a slab and say, yeah, you don't have a level slab, and that's somehow an engineering purview?
I think that's part of where that conversation needs to come in is, as inspectors, we aren't engineers, and I've seen inspectors go through and do zip levels and say, you need 10 piers around the front of the house, and a structural engineer comes in and goes, you don't need anything, this house is fine.
Yeah. Right.
But and that's the extreme on one side, so I think that's where really that conversation needs to happen, is where's that line?
Yeah.
Where do we draw, and then we can go back as a standards subcommittee and maybe redraw the lines for our standards there, so that everything's in compliance, so that we get along with the engineers.
Right, because I think that when we render opinions on foundations, my feeling is that's sketchy anyway, because of that. Once you get an inspector to recommend repairs, we're not supposed to, that's really crossing the line, and that's when you get into.
Do you recommend an engineer to look at it then?
Well, then you would recommend that, definitely. But
What they should do is report it as a deficiency,
Right.
as not performing.
Yeah, exactly.
Kristen?
So I think that it's important to know what the line is with talking to the engineers as to what is it that we're safe doing and stays within our standards, and then we push it over to an engineer to follow up.
Because based on some of the comments that we got, there's inspectors out there that want us to just not look at foundation altogether.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a mistake, but
Agree.
I think
I agree
we need
with
to, those lines need to be drawn, and we need to make sure that we're working with.
Yeah, it'd be silly not to do something that's the base of the house.
It's kind of,
Yeah.
Details.
Yeah.
Kristen, I was going to ask if you could get a copy of their engineering standards that they've got established and distribute that to us, or I'm happy to do it as well, just so we can have some background on what we're going up against.
Well, basically, I can tell you what their draft opinion says, and that is that it goes into what our rules require, and then what the conclusion is that we have drawn as staff, that inspectors are not permitted to provide an engineering opinion on a foundation unless they also hold a PE license. But you are permitted to and required to report present and visible indications used to render the opinion of adverse performance on a foundation. And the inspection is not a technically exhaustive inspection of the structure, systems, or components. It is the client's responsibility to obtain further evaluations and/or cost estimates from qualified service professionals. And the general standards of practice, or the standards of practice provide general limitations which specify the inspector is not required to determine the cause or source of a condition and the cause or effect of deficiencies, and is not required to recommend or provide engineering, architecture, appraisal, mitigation, physical surveying, realty, or other specialty services. And those are all found in 535-227D. The conclusion that they have proposed in the draft is that analyzing the cause of a condition, recommendations for repair, or providing any other expert engineering opinion associated with a foundation, including the foundation systems and components, would be considered the practice of engineering per the Engineering Act and could warrant disciplinary action from the Board of Professional Engineers if conducted by an individual unlicensed as a professional engineer.
Do they have any jurisdiction over us?
No, they do not.
They would have jurisdiction to discipline you for unlicensed activity, just like we can discipline an inspector or an individual who is not licensed as an inspector, but is performing inspection services. So they do have that sort of overlapping jurisdiction.
Why don't we, before we get too deep into this, go back and find the original letter we got from them first and see where we're at with that.
We don't have an original letter. If
There is-
you
there
as
is one out
inspectors are aware of a letter and can track that down, you're welcome to do that, and I will certainly ask them and notify them that we are aware, we have been made aware of a letter that was rendered in the past, and see if they can obtain that from their files and their records. And if we do, then I will circulate that to all of you.
Terry may have that, but if anybody would, I would think Terry would have that.
Terry,
Texas Association of Real Estate.
possibly,
Association.
possibly. But we will make them aware that there exists this opinion from the past, but that has not been referenced in our discussions with them so far.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So we'll keep you posted on our communications with them.
I appreciate it. And then anything I hear, I'll pass on to you guys. So, are we moving on to standards and enforcement, or is there any more? Okay.
Good morning, Michael Loy, Standards Enforcement Services. Just let you know, the first 2 pages is what we've done since the last committee. The overall one, the subsequent pages, they include fiscal year 2017, which basically goes from September through August, but this includes the cases that we closed in September of this year. So the next meeting, the report won't be as long because this includes a whole fiscal year worth of discipline plus September. Did 13 formal and informal disciplinary actions since the last meeting, and overall for the fiscal year there was 33 cases that we performed disciplinary action. I stand by for anyone who has any questions about the report.
Do you see as a trend that complaints against inspectors are going up in the last few years?
Statistically, yeah, it went up 20 cases or 20. It went up. I think we had 81 this past year, on average for the past, I guess, 4 years that I can remember. It's right around between 50 to 60. So, all of our cases, all the license types have gone up over the past 18 months. So that would causally, I mean, if brokers go up, then inspectors are going to go up. So.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the advisory letter that went out on, it looks like September 14th. One says 2014.
Yes.
2017. Was that the same inspection, or was that 2 different inspections?
No, those are 2 different cases, because if you look at the case number,
Okay, I didn't know.
right before that, those are 2 different things.
Okay, I didn't know if the case numbers were by.
The date's just the date they were closed.
Okay.
So.
There was a comment from Mr. Cahill that was received over the weekend regarding what he is describing as care and custody complaints. And he points to the enforcement committee, or the enforcement complaints on September 14th and September 28th. They're the last 3 entries on page 2 of the materials. And he asked the committee that he doesn't know the specifics, but he asked the committee to consider that when he is doing inspections, he's had the client turn the pool heater on after he had shut it off, and he caught it on the follow-up. He's also had a client return with his brother and turn a pool heater on after the inspection was complete, and the gas bill was $1,500. Luckily, the buyer admitted to the problem. They've had a client turn on an oven after he left the home in the care of the agent and the client. The agent backed up his report. A client has also turned a switch on a gas fireplace after he had turned it off and gone on to other areas. And then he also had a $50,000 insurance claim from a bank, and the bank said that the kitchen sink drain stop was left in place and the sink was dripping and the house flooded. He will take the step of videoing his departure with owner privacy in mind to verify that doors are locked, ovens are off, plumbing is intact, etc. He doesn't distribute the video, and in this case, the video showed the kitchen sink drain stops on the countertop and the sink was not running. He was able to post the video to a private YouTube link for the bank to view, and he never heard from the lawyer again. So he's concerned that, you know, the these types of enforcement actions are putting the inspector in the position of proving care and custody, and happen when the inspector is required to enter the home using a super key, and the client and others show up without agents present, and other persons remain after the inspector's departure.
We've had this conversation in previous deals where, first off, you shouldn't be letting people stay at the house after he's gone anyway. And if an agent has to be there, or the inspector has to be there, if he's leaving and the agent's there, he should be making the agent ding that super key so that they have a record that shows that they're responsible for whatever happens. But with this, the impression I got from him was that, one, he's talking about the pictures, the later agenda item. But the other issue is that it's almost like he's assuming that the enforcement doesn't do any follow-up and finds out what's going on. That, somebody just said the inspector left the oven on, boom, advisory letter, and when anybody who's been around it knows that that's not how that works.
Like on these 3 specific, we made sure that it was made more than a reasonable situation, that it was more than likely the inspector did this. And look, you have to look at it like this. Okay, this falls into the statute for negligence, and we don't want to fine someone for doing some of this, but this is possibly a safety issue, so that's why we just it's a very well-written advisory letter, just advising them this happened. It's not an affirmative that you did it, but it's possibly, there is a possibility, because we eliminated the other variables. So just double check your closing procedures, and that's it. So
I have a question about the pool was overflowing. So we're assuming that the inspector turned on a hose to fill up the pool, or?
no, there's apparently a function on that one where you turn it on. There's a direct water line into the pool. The neighbor called on this situation. They called up, it was like maybe an hour or two later, and there was no access. We had there was no one access the house. Someone said someone jumped the fence. Some teenagers. This is the middle of the day, and they left the gas furnace on as well. It was an outdoor fireplace. So, and there was a key left there, which was no one's. And the inspector said, "That's not my key," or whatever. So, we didn't have affirmative, but it was more than likely that something happened that, so we just said, you need to be aware of what you're touching or whatever, and, we just left it at that. I mean, because you have to look at negligence, at least for us, from our perspective, it's a $500 fine to start. So if this is a concern of the commission or the committee, maybe we should modify the penalty matrix for negligence and lower it to 100. So if we do have some absolute truth, then it's not worthy of $500 fine. Maybe it's worthy of $100 fine. I'm just throwing that out there because it's a debate that we have. In these types of cases where there's obviously a concern, but without, it's something that, I'm not sure if it's worthy of formal disciplinary action or not. So.
Right. Now, do advisory letters, when they're sent, do they show up if somebody was doing a search on TREIC's website?
No, you would have to do a public records search.
Okay.
That's the only way they'd be able to receive it.
Okay. Any other discussion or comments?
Concern or a common occurrence in enforcement? Do you get these?
I don't know. A
often,
lot of times stuff like just, you get a bunch in a row. And that seems like, that seems to just be the case for this report. I mean, we'll get several of these type of things a year, but typically there's the variables that we can't eliminate. Like someone finds it, 5 days later or something like that. And there's been obviously people that's gone in and out of the house. So those ones usually end up in insufficient evidence. So
I wonder if John Cahill is also trying to address anything else that has to do with, make sure it's not any other agenda items, that has to do with the fact that inspectors, and this might fall under our super key access that we have to get into a lockbox, so then we have to become members of the Board of Realtors to do that. And if that could possibly fall into an issue where more and more inspections now, there's no agents. We have buyers and sellers and no agents present. And so I think maybe he's also addressing the fact that nobody else is present, and it's putting the inspector in the role of having to monitor the buyer the whole time with no agent there to represent them. There's nobody for the seller, and a lot of times both parties are there chit-chatting with each other, and they turn on things and then they turn off things, and
Which is the debate Brad and I had last meeting about letting people access the property.
Yeah, and so does that fall under our supra key access rules, or does it fall under whether an agent should really be present to represent all these parties, and is that our problem if they're not, or?
You can't dictate that the agents have to be there.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
their own business decision.
yeah, I know, but it just does leave inspectors wide open sometimes for having to be responsible for all the parties that are present, even though technically we shouldn't be, other than the people that are our clients.
The 1 to 4 family contract indemnifies agents if they're in showing a house and a client messes something up or breaks it. Does not indemnify inspectors.
Right.
So as part of, at least in my area, with our MLS rules, at least people that are on the Netra system, if you let somebody in the house, you're responsible for anything and everything they do inside that house.
Well, that makes us responsible for all people that get lined up while we're doing the inspection.
Which is exactly
WDI, contractors, tile guys, floor guys, people that want to put new,
Which is exactly
window
why if you're
treatments.
doing an inspection and you can't directly supervise those people, they should not be in the house without an agent present.
What we really need is some kind of a system in place through MLS or something where not only, I can't tell you how many times I've showed up for an inspection and the seller's like, I didn't expect you today. But we could have a system possibly, or something needs to be developed where when an inspection is done, the seller recognizes that it's actually an appointment, authorizes the appointment, and has the option at that point to allow or not allow that customer to walk around with the licensed inspector, to allow or not allow those contractors to be there without their own personal representative on site. Those kinds of things would legally eliminate those types of problems.
Yeah, because I feel like when these advisory letters start showing up, a lot of times it's because there's other people. I don't know how many times I've been to an inspection where the people are turning on stuff after I've turned it all off, and then I go back again and turn it all off again, and then I leave one more final check before I lock the door, and now I have lights on again, or things like that. And you start the dishwasher when you get there and they've turned it off because they've opened it and looked at it, But I'm just saying, we need to have a discussion on this and maybe put it, Tony, as an agenda item on a future meeting where we can maybe get some representation from agents on how the process should work, so that we're not completely liable for everybody else that shows up that's been scheduled by the realtor for the buyer or the buyer themselves, that we're suddenly now responsible for because we have to be there no matter what. It's our appointment. Then they piggyback on us opening up the lockbox.
And I know in our area, Brad's familiar, virtually all the brokers in our area have been telling their agents that they're forbidden to be there with their clients during the inspection.
Some of them that are doing it.
To try to eliminate their liability in any follow-up action. Like if you're not there, you don't know about it.
Right. You didn't hear it, you didn't see it.
They encourage their clients to be there, and then they tell their agents you are forbidden to be there. And sometimes it might be, if we're in the Temple area, I only have one guy that has lockbox access in Temple, so if it's one of the other inspectors, the buyer's agent will open it up and tell them, I can't go in, my broker says I can't go in, I'm out of here, you're here with the inspector, let me know how it goes. And that brings us back into, the agent opened it for us, or gave us a one-day code, the liability of, and just like she was saying, they take off and they got their kids in there and they're like, you cannot, that's kind of like the inspectors doing training. You can't watch more than 1 or 2 at a time. I'm a little OCD and spend 20 minutes rechecking every room as I heard the cats out the front door.
Yeah.
Well, I think we do need to have it as an agenda item, but I think we've got to be careful about how much we talk about it here, because it's not a current agenda item.
Right, that's how we're going to move on.
Is it a communication or education item? Is this something we would want to put as an article in the advisor?
Discussing with the agents and brokers, if we need to somehow make a decision on who's responsible for the clients and what they do while we're doing our job.
Because our job isn't showing the clients around the house. Our job is going there and hopefully being able to focus completely on putting a report together for our buyer. But when they're set free with no representation, it puts us in a place, and then we miss things or don't get things turned off, or there's just too many things going on, and then advisory letters get sent for something getting turned on that maybe because I know when I go into a house, I turn things off as I've been in each room, so I know where I've been and I don't go back there again. But then when you have people coming in behind you, it makes it really difficult, and so I think that it deserves a discussion, but I don't know who exactly we would talk to. I don't know who we would discuss it with in the future, but maybe we can get some help from the real estate community.
I think it's safe to say that this is all good conversation, but before a letter goes out, and before any enforcement action taken, there's an investigation by staff, attorneys, and investigators, and they're not loosely just thrown out there.
Okay.
So,
well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply.
No,
that.
I know you're not.
They
but
get down to as much as they can who might not have done it.
Yeah, but from my experience working with the staff on enforcement for the last number of years, I think they do a very good job.
Right.
And any advisory letter that goes out is probably well founded.
Okay. Well, I'm not disputing that. I'm sorry. I just kind of got off track. So if we can put this for an agenda item, and we'll figure out who we need to talk to with the real estate commission, that would be great. All right. So, sorry. Is that all with enforcement?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Okay, and education and licensing.
Yes, Gwen Jackson, Director of Education and Licensing Services. First report here is our fiscal year comparisons for applications received, renewal activity. By fiscal year ending August, we received a total of 921 original applications, which is a 4.5% increase over that of the previous fiscal year. So we received 40 more applications during that fiscal year. We had 24 reinstatement applications received, 903 total licenses were issued from original applications, and then 25 licenses were issued from reinstatement applications. You'll see the percentage, the change percentages in the far right column. Then for our renewal activity, about roughly 76% of the inspectors who are eligible to renew did renew their license during this past fiscal year.
So in the last 2 years, we had over 1,400 new inspectors.
Over the last two, no, not.
So professional inspector licenses from original applications this year, 799. Last year, 641.
Right.
So isn't that 1,400 in 2 years?
2 years.
So almost half the inspectors?
In 2 years.
Nice counting 799 together.
Oh,
No,
yes.
licenses from. But it's
Yes.
almost half of the professional inspectors that are actively licensed.
Yes, but you have to keep in mind that during that same time period, licenses are expiring as well. People are not renewing.
Oh, yeah, no, I absolutely get that. It's just kind of
His comments about the
kind of
large
staggering.
percentage of new inspectors.
Yeah, it's a
versus-
staggering statistic that almost half of our professional inspectors.
It's a lot simpler than 20,000, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, okay.
Ready for the next one. All right, this one is the L2 report, and this shows that we've had an increase of about 283 inspectors over the past year, which brings our current total to 3,869. And this increase was primarily in the number of professional inspectors, where we received over 277 of those new inspectors were professional inspectors. And then on the next report is our examination activity. And if you look at the first attempt pass rate, you'll see that we're doing much better than we were in 2016. First attempt pass rate for the real estate inspector in 2016 was at 25%. This past year it was at 37%. Professional inspector in 2016 was 51%, and it's now at basically 68.5%. So we're seeing improvement there as well. And then the next report has to do with our instructor distribution. The bottom half of that report centers around the inspector-instructor distribution, and you'll see the numbers in the far right corner is our totals for August, ending August of 2017, for the various inspector-instructor license types.
Any questions, anybody?
Is there any concern about the lack of anybody doing apprentice or real estate inspectors just jumping? Is there any conversations about?
As far as I know, we haven't had any negative, any conversations in regards to there aren't enough of them. I think for the most part, individuals who are applying are more focused on wanting to have that professional inspector license, because as you'll notice, we don't have as many real estate inspectors either, which is that interim license type.
We had some conversation about continuing education, legal and ethics, whatnot, about when they do it online and enforcing the length of time people spend on there. I was under the impression that we had that corrected with the providers, but then I just took my legal and ethics and online and finished it in 30 minutes. No, I mean, it's just because the way it's set up, you can go in, just test, done.
Would you share with us who you took it from?
Champions. I mean, it just went on and start exam, boom, or you take quizzes and then start exam. I mean, both 4-hour courses finish in a total of 30 minutes. I think it's a concern.
Did you score 100?
Is it a concern for you?
It is a concern because the whole point is that inspectors are supposed to be spending 8 hours reviewing those things. Now,
Is the
But you
intent
could have
to,
if you wanted to.
is the intent to verify?
could have.
Is the intent to verify competency? Or is it that I gotta do my 8 hours of parole before I go back out again?
If we're going to talk about competent and whatnot, then we need to change the way that's set up to make it, well, you can do 8 hours, but you don't have to do 8 hours. But at current, if our rule states that we're supposed to be spending 8 hours, we should be spending 8 hours on there. And defensive driving, you do defensive driving, do that. It's timed. You can't finish it faster than that.
Yes.
And that technology's been there for over a decade, so I know it's there, and it shouldn't be too prohibitive for them, for educators to put up.
I think part of the defensive driving thing, though, is part of the punishment of being there for that
Yes.
long.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's not a legitimate concern if it's 8 hours and you finish in 30 minutes. But I think a larger question, I'm just going to throw it out there, is if you're able to finish it in 30 minutes, even if you're forced to stay there for 8 hours, that's also not doing what we want to do. Just forcing them to be there for 8 hours. If you're able to get the information you need to pass the test in less than that time, there's something else going on there that needs to be addressed.
You shouldn't be punished for being competent, really, when it comes down to it. I mean, there's a lot
an option to say, retake the exam, which would take 20 minutes, and practice the exam. To get it done.
I think what Lee's trying to point out is if it's a required 8-hour course, then it should be an 8-hour course. So if we could look at the language in that and say it's not a required 8-hour course, it consists of 8 hours, but you're not required to sit there for 8.
Well, I can look into that too. I can see what it is that we reviewed and approved, and our current standards require there to be substantial enough content to support the time requirement, specific instructions to the student for how to proceed through the course, and or a timing mechanism may be in place to prevent the student from getting to the exam until the number of hours have passed. That's not an absolute requirement if there is enough guidance and substantial material to support the 4 hours, but it's a lot about how the course is structured.
Right. There's three things when I logged in. There's three things. There's the ebook, which was wrong, which I had to go back and tell them you're using the old book. We have a new class now. So after that argument for a month, they finally got the new one, and that was all fine and going. But you log in, ebook, practice quizzes, and then the final test. You don't even have to open the ebook. You can go take the quizzes, knock through those, about 20 questions and 2 or 3 different quizzes, and then go take the final test, and you're done.
And did you take them, just for my reference, post-September 1? Or
yeah, just took them last week.
You just took them? Okay.
I just want to bring up an example. We get our architectural licenses. You take 7 tests, and they say you got 4 hours for this test. You don't take 4 hours for the test.
Absolutely.
You would not be expected. Basically, you're expected to check over your work again when you're done. That's why you're getting extra time, sometimes maybe. But sometimes it'll take people 4 hours. Sometimes it takes a person 1 hour.
Absolutely.
Get up and walk out.
But is your rule that you have to spend, is there a rule that states you have to take 4 hours of education for that test? Our rule states you have to be in that class for 8 hours.
But it's a strange rule because it's like saying a stamp for every single person. It doesn't mean every single person is going to operate the same way. And if you're forcing them to do that, does it really mean it's doing anyone any good at all?
Don't get me wrong. I'm not personally upset that I only had to spend a half an hour versus 8 hours. I have a lot of things I could be doing in 8 hours. But if we're going to have a rule, we need to enforce that rule, or we need to change the rule. We can't have a rule there and then let education providers not abide by that rule.
And Matt, the education, the 8 hours is not like for your test. That's to give you time to take it. The 8 hours here is there's supposed to be 8 hours of content that you're supposed to be reviewing.
Which would have been had he opened the ebook and read it.
And there are some providers online that do test you, they time you through the entire course. You're not allowed to finish watching that video until that time has expired. So the ones that want to not have to spend the 8 hours required are going to go to the providers that are going to just let you take the quizzes and the final exam in 20 minutes.
That 4 hours, though, is supposed to be 4 hours worth of work.
Oh, okay.
So that's my point. I mean, if you can do it faster, then I don't see why you have to say it's a rule. It just means you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs.
Waiting for.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind if we have some way to. I don't mind if we have a way to test out of it. For people that aren't confident in those, because I agree. I don't think you should punish people that have the competency in there, but we don't have that rule in place. So if we need to change that rule, that's something we may need to look at.
Actually, we do. So the interpretation of all of those requirements, you look at the standards that are set for education, it requires that there be either a timing mechanism, but even if there is a timing mechanism, which is, as you said, that technology's been around a long time. That's the easy way to do it. It's really cheap to produce a course with a timing mechanism, but nobody wants to take it. Because everybody, like you, wants to, they only want to, if I know it, I don't need to be punished for knowing it already. If I already know it, let me just zoom right on through. So there are 2 other ways for the course provider, and we have other experts in the room on this, I'm just tossing this out. 2 other ways for them to verify that in fact this is 8 hours worth of content for an average taker. Okay. And we evaluate the courses based on those standards. And so if they can show us that in fact it meets the content, there's sufficient content requirement, and then either there was a series of tests done with average, unsophisticated, not people from the board or super knowledgeable, then we will accept that. There are some industry standards for that. There is one other thing that we have spent a lot of time working on, the course delivery standards, to reduce the number, and this was some of the questions Jen was asking, to reduce the avenues for actually cheating. Okay. So things like, we require that there actually be a final exam where you haven't seen, at least 2/3 of those questions ever in your chapter reviews. Those are standards that we put in place only in the last couple of years, because that was one of the cheater ways, was either not to have a final exam or to have a final exam, but you'd already seen all the questions in your quiz reviews, those kinds of things, make it really.
Yeah, they did that for a long time.
Oh, and candidate identity or test taker identity safeguards, those kinds of things as well. So you can't set up a side business of taking those classes for other people, right? Because you're really smart and you can do it really fast.
There was no identification questions.
Okay.
And the questions that I went through on the final exam were not things that I would only know simply because I said on the, I mean, they were basic questions. And that's kind of my concern. It's just I think we're blowing right past this course, which is really important. A lot of people spend a lot of time coming up with those 2 4-hour courses and gone through a lot to get to that point, to make it better, make it stronger, to make people more educated. But we're not enforcing that people actually get educated.
Well, we are enforcing, and when people are
The education providers, I think, are letting some of that slip. And
and that's where we need.
And
to
I'm not
check.
raking on champions. Just happens to be the one that I use. I'm sure they are not the only one, but we got to find some way to better quantify people actually reviewing that material.
And thank you, Doug, for bringing up those points.
Well, thanks, Lee, and it happens regularly. This is not a unique observation. In every one of these kinds of meetings, it's like, yep, I just did that. Just did that. It's a 6-hour class, and I did it in 27 minutes. Yeah, but you helped write the darn course, right? Don't you? You know all that stuff already. But if mechanically you can never have to review anything and just go directly to the exam, then there's a problem between what was submitted to us for approval and what's being used or offered online, because that's not supposed to be done.
So do we want to, you're going to follow up?
I will,
see if there's
yes.
any- Okay.
Yes, we'll follow up.
Thank you. All right, so Glenn, is that?
That concludes my report, yes, thank you.
All right, so now we are on agenda item 7, discussion and possible action.
Six.
Sorry. I skipped one. I saw education and kept going. Discussion and possible action on agenda item 6 regarding amendments to 535-218, continuing education required for renewal.
These are the amendments that the committee recommended to the commission and were proposed at the last commission meeting in August. They removed the exemption or the exception for exempt providers. And you'll see the proposed rule changes on page 12 of your materials. And there are actually 2 changes. There's a change to 535-218 to remove the language in subsection F and then renumber the remaining sections, and then also a corresponding change in 535.71 to remove the reference to exempt providers.
We have not received any comments, right?
We did not receive any comments on this proposed change. Actually, there is one more change. There's a removal of subsection B in 535.71. That's shown on page 13 of your materials. But basically, all of those changes that I described, just remove that exemption as the committee recommended and the commission proposed at its meeting in August.
Where is A?
And this was put on the agenda not for any action necessarily, unless, just so we have comments and you can review it if there were any changes that need to be made based on those comments.
Maybe I'm missing something, but on number 3, a CE provider is permitted to offer, is that assumed to be section A? Because then it starts on B, C.
No, it's on the prior page.
On the previous. A
application
is
for
the one
approval.
up here, okay.
Application for approval, that's
Oh,
little
okay,
L.
okay, there I am, okay,
Yeah,
I'm
there-
sorry.
We do that all.
Any questions from any of the committee members on this? So we need to vote on this, or are we already?
Do they need to recommend approval?
That would be the only thing, is that you would recommend that the commission go ahead and adopt this change.
Okay, so everybody's.
I make a motion for recommendation.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is there a second? And Sean.
Did someone second?
Sean.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we will move on to agenda item 7. Discussion and possible action regarding amendments to the 535-211 professional liability insurance or any other insurance that provides coverage for violations of Chapter 1102, and then Section D, REI, COP.
Yes, this recommendation was discussed by the committee and recommended to the commission at the committee's meeting in August. The commission did propose this amendment as the committee recommended. It was published in the Texas Register, and as you may recall the discussion, the issue came to our attention when we were contacted by an attorney who represented a defendant, a plaintiff in a case, and the inspector's insurance policy was only the statutory minimum, and there was no money left over to pay for the plaintiff's damages because the policy limits had been used and exhausted by the inspector's defense attorneys. And so the issue was one of statutory construction, and that is the statute requires inspectors to maintain this minimum amount of liability coverage to protect the consumers. So what we were trying to do when the committee proposed this change was to clarify what exactly does that mean. And as we discussed, there are several different types of insurance policies. Most inspectors purchase what is called a defense within limits policy, and that means that all of the attorney's fees and costs of any litigation can be deducted straight off the top of the policy before any damages are paid out to the consumer. So this was to clarify that inspectors, in order to satisfy the statutory requirement, should purchase what is called a defense outside of limits policy, which would leave the entire policy limits available to the consumers to satisfy that statutory requirement. The other option for inspectors is to purchase a policy that is higher than the statutory minimum. So right now the statute requires a $100,000 per occurrence and per year aggregate limit. And an option to satisfy that requirement but still have your defense costs within limits would be to purchase a policy that is $250,000 and $250,000. And what I mean by that is it's a $250,000 per occurrence and a $250,000 annual policy limits. So you're just raising the limits on your policy, and you get the same type of policy. We did reach out to several insurance companies who provide coverage to various inspectors that are licensed by the commission, and all of the insurance carriers that we spoke to, you can see some of the email exchanges in the materials starting at page 16. They do write this coverage, the defense outside of limits, and all of them said that for a minimum policy of $100,000, the increase to inspectors would be anywhere from 10 to 20%, which would translate into $100 to $200, because the standard cost of a policy averages between $1,000 and $1,200, just depending on the inspector's insurance ratings and other factors when they are underwriting. But currently, the cost to inspectors to buy the standard statutory minimum policy, which is what most inspectors do purchase according to these insurance carriers, it costs them between $1,000 and $1,200. So by having this change and clarifying what the statute means, it would raise that cost by $100 to $200. So it would be a 10 to 20% increase. And that was pretty standard across the board from all of the insurance carriers that we contacted. You will also see that we received several comments from others, not just insurance carriers, but from, I believe it was Terry and TREIC. Both of them are opposing this change. And those comments, let's see, let me get through the insurance comments. Those go through page 30, and TREIC's comments are found on page 31. They start on page 31, and they oppose the change. They don't believe that one complaint is sufficient to cause TREIC to make this change, and they point out that there is still a recovery fund for consumer protection in addition to the inspector's required liability. So they are asking that this change not be adopted. There is also a comment that starts on page 32 from Don Nixon. He is an insurance agent affiliated with TREIC that says that they have never had a claim that exceeds the $100,000 limit. Typical on the claims, they will expend $25,000 to $30,000 in litigation expenses for depositions, interrogatories, requests for productions, and mediations, and will end up settling for some nominal sum just to stop the bleeding. His comment is that he believes it will be harmful to inspectors. Rates will rise significantly. Some carriers may elect to leave the market. Virtually all professional liability are written on a claims made policy form. And incorporating this change would cause those costs to rise drastically for these types of policies. And he doesn't believe that the rule change would protect consumers.
So the one example where the 100,000 was exhausted, will the recovery fund or the recovery fund protect the consumer?
I don't know, because the attorney that we spoke to was not affiliated with a claim at that time that was pending at the time when he contacted us. We advised him of the inspector's recovery fund, but he may have just told his client that you can do this on your own. We have received a couple of inspector recovery funds since we were contacted, but I don't know if they were related to that lawsuit or not.
Do we have anything to substantiate that lawsuit?
No, I don't. What we do have is that this is a question of statutory interpretation. So,
but in your statement to us, we did have a claim that exceeded the $100,000.
we did not have a claim. There was a lawsuit.
But we don't have anything to substantiate that.
No.
Okay.
Other than this lawyer contacted us and asked about
do we have the lawyer's
coverage.
information? Can we contact him?
No, I don't have it. He contacted and spoke to Tony. It was several months ago.
Okay.
Because we've been talking about this change for over a year. And when we finally brought it to your attention, this was well after we were contacted by the lawyer, because it was a statutory question.
They get that much money.
There's got
What's generally a small claim.
There's got to be something more substantial.
It's got to be like major stucco or foundation or structural. But I believe that what we've got in place now is the safest for the consumer. I mean, I'm not even partial to the insurance that we have at the moment, but it is law and we have it. Increasing our fees at all, I think, is going to hurt a lot of inspectors, especially in times when we have lulls in the market. We still have to pay the fee.
Increasing it to 200 or 250 just deepens the pocket for the plaintiff attorney to go after more, does it not? That doesn't eliminate.
Well, talking about the case is pretty much irrelevant. The whole issue here is whether we're in compliance with the state statute or not, and that's really the meat and potatoes of what we have to get at. We have to be in compliance with what the legislature has told us we have to be in compliance with. Period. End of story. Now, one of my concerns is, granted, I don't want them to be higher either. I don't know who's paying $1,000 or $1,200 there, but I think that's kind of low. Because I know that the vast majority of inspectors that I know, because I've talked about this for the last 6 months, they're nowhere near $1,000 to $1,200 a year for a policy. Not even close.
For a $100,000 policy? Sorry.
Yes.
They base it on, a lot of it's based on your volume.
Okay.
And in years you've inspected, so a new inspector is going to have a lot more.
Yeah. And if you raise the policy limit to $250K, that doesn't actually fix the problem. And I think Brad touched on that.
No guarantee.
There's still no guarantee that there's still going to be $100,000 afterwards. If a lawyer sees that there's up to $250,000 there, they're going to be a lot more inclined to possibly go after that $250K. So that, I don't think that actually fixes the statutory problem.
It would, because we, the one thing that we have in addition to the rule is that we've added language to the certificate of insurance, and that's shown on page 15 of your materials.
Right.
And the insurance company has to assure that the policy would not contain a provision that reduces the coverage below the minimum amount stated above.
And I saw that. But I've also talked to 2 or 3 different insurance companies myself, including State Farm, who does mine, and they do not have a policy that does defense without limits. Not in the entire country. They do not. It does not exist. That policy does not exist in their entire company. All their underwriters say the same exact thing. We do not have a policy that accompanies that. So if we put this into place, that's going to put a lot of inspectors in awkward positions unless they go after the specific insurance companies that you talk to.
Well, I can't speak to State Farm. I mean, State Farm does have other carriers that they can write with. Now, State Farm is, I believe, they're a county mutual.
Property and casualty.
It depends. They have different types
But
of companies.
depending on the type of insurance company, they have access to a wide variety of insurance markets.
Right, which is where I get my E&O through. It's one of their different carriers.
No.
But that's the underwriters that they're talking about. They don't have that policy.
Well, and that's surprising because all of the insurance carriers, the agents that we contacted, their carriers have access to this type of policy. So,
Insurance companies
in the materials,
That's agencies, not companies.
What I'm concerned
they
is,
go to different companies
Lloyd's of
to
London
write.
tells me they will not do it.
Lloyd's is one of the companies that does offer defense outside of limits policies.
Not according to the insurance company that I use.
Yeah, because I checked with.
I'm not opposed to making a revision. I'm not opposed to
Sure.
making a revision, but I'd like to table this for a period of time and withdraw our recommendation from the commission until we've had some time to review it as a committee.
Well, let's have a little bit more discussion before we get to the end of that, because I'd like to, this is our opportunity to throw some things out to be discussed, I think. One of them is that I don't know, haven't really discussed it with many other inspectors, but I've been with the same insurance company for years, which is a benefit to my policy rate. And when I use Inspector Pro. When I contacted my representative, he said they won't do it. That means that's requiring me to now find a new insurance company and start all over again with a new rate or a different rate and a new history. There's something to keeping your insurance with the same insurance company for years. I've done that with my car, my house, and so it makes it really difficult if we have less providers in Texas that are willing to do that, because then inspectors' rates go up. And how do we know that when we suddenly ask insurance providers to start writing policies for home inspectors, which have always, it seems like, included this defense within limits clause, to now write it outside of the limits, that we're not reducing the amount of insurance policies available to home inspectors. And then, and I'm just throwing this out for discussion, and then, of course, now our rates will probably be higher. And I'm assuming that once, what you're saying is, once we all have policies that are defense without limits, that then meets the statutory requirement that is in our rules, then where are we as an industry as far as fees, and is 100,000 still going to be enough? And how many inspectors can pay $30,000 out of pocket to protect themselves, as far as that's what our insurance is for? So if we don't even have our insurance to help us with our defense, which could be unsubstantiated, and there ends up being no payout, but at least we have that, I feel like I don't know how we're helping the consumer if we're out of business, or we can't even find a policy that we can afford or that truly protects both sides. I mean, I think everybody should be able to be protected by this insurance, not just one party, but I understand both sides of it. But I really think that there's a lot more discussion that needs to be had before we continue. Maybe we need to get some representatives from the insurance providers to physically come and discuss this with us at the table, so that everybody can ask enough questions to get it answered sufficiently.
And we can explore those options. What I hear the committee saying is that you're concerned about the availability of a policy that complies with the statute and the cost of getting a policy that complies with the statute. And some of the commenters have addressed those two issues. The insurance companies have said that inspectors could comply with this new proposed interpretation in one of two ways. They could obtain a policy that is a defense outside of limits policy that is available in the insurance marketplace from several different insurance carriers, including Lloyd's of London, despite what Brad's insurance carrier has told him. But that's only one way to satisfy the requirement, is to change the type of policy that you're getting. And that would cause an increase in the fee of between 10 to 20% on the statutory minimum policy. So that's anywhere from $100 to $200. based on the cost that they have provided from their underwriters. The second way that an inspector could satisfy the statutory requirement is to purchase a policy that is more than the statutory limits. And what we found in our research was that Texas has one of the lowest statutory limits for inspector insurance policies. Most of the surrounding states have a minimum of $250,000 or $300,000 per occurrence that they require their home inspectors to obtain an insurance policy for. So we pitched that to the insurance agents that we contacted and said, well, if an inspector wanted to have a defense within limits policy and raise their limits so that they didn't have this issue, how much would that cost? What would that increase be? And what we were told is that the increase would be about the same. Again, to raise your limits from 100-100 to a 250-250 policy, it would raise the cost about 10 to 20%. Now, they also said that you can get a general liability rider on your policy, which most inspectors get, for an additional $50. So that's the information that we have collected to date.
So raising it to 250 would guarantee you would never drop below 100, no matter what the legal.
See, that's my problem. I don't see that raising it to 250 actually fixes that problem.
It does because of the certificate of insurance. They have to write a policy that doesn't contain a provision that puts the coverage below the statutory minimum.
Right, but if that's the case, they could do it for $100,000 without putting it in there. So basically, we're back to the same only one option.
No, because the statute is a $100,000 minimum. So you can't write a $100,000 policy unless it is a defense outside of limits policy. By raising it, you can have defense within limits as long as the statute, or as long as the coverage doesn't drop below $100,000.
If the legal fees were $200,000, you'd be left with $50,000. So you'd be below the.
That's true.
So the number could go on. There's not really a policy you can set in place that would comply with that.
Well, that would be a non-compliant policy.
Right.
But she's saying if you raise it to 250, right? Is that what I'm understanding? That it would be compliant.
Yes.
So you're saying if you raise it to 250, there has to be a specific rider within that 250 policy that says the defense within limits can't exceed 150,000.
Correct.
That's what you're getting at?
In order for it to comply with the statute, you would have to have that. Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about bumping our policy to 2.5 times the limits of what it is, which is going to be more than $100 to $200.
Yes.
Or going to a policy that's defense without limits, which I have found extremely hard to find an insurance company that does, including my own, to do it. And that's going to be more than $100 to $200. I understand where you're getting your numbers, but I'm telling you in reality, what's actually being paid is substantially more than that.
Well, I mean, these are carriers that write insurance for licensed inspectors. They may not write insurance for anybody on the committee, but
in Texas,
yes, yes.
Are those ones that do write it for companies that have multiple inspectors?
One of the guys in here, Brett Byland, is who I use.
The vast majority of your inspectors are sole proprietors.
Okay, so Sean uses Brett Byland, who is one of.
He's a lead MGA.
Yes.
It concerns me in all of this. Texas is a great place to do business. I've done business in the States, and I love Texas for its advantages. There's a lot of guys getting into this business, as we know, 1,400 in the last 2 years. There used to be a cost of startup in this business that was very low. If you already had a truck, you're in good shape. If you already had a ladder, you're in good shape. But this industry has evolved into something completely different than it was 20 years ago. To come in as your basic home inspector, you still need those initial things. Now we've got fees that we've got to pay to the Texas Real Estate Commission, which is very low, by the way. If you want to do your termite work, you've got to pay very high fees to the TDA. That's another fee if you're going to provide that service. And inspectors have found that as they start their business, they have to find their niche. They have to figure out a way to set themselves apart from their competition in order to get the attention they need. With those fees, we also have the cost of inspection that didn't exist when I started. When it began to exist, lawsuits began to appear. That's just my perception of it. There may be data behind that that proves me otherwise. If you're wanting to get in to really protect the consumer, that's outside of the basic role that we're designed to do, you have to start investing in equipment. And equipment is expensive. It's hard to do your job today with a screwdriver and a stick thermometer. People are getting into infrared cameras in order to take their service to a higher level and to give themselves a marketing edge. I'm against any kind of insurance increases, period, just because I think it's going to drive a lot of these startups out of business. It's also going to, I believe, increase the potential for lawsuits because there's more money in the deep pockets. Because that's what the attorneys are going to go for. It's who's got the deep pockets. It happens every time. If the inspector wants to have the option of having this defense beyond limits, then that's a good marketing advantage for them. If it's required in order to meet the statute, I think it becomes a very dangerous precedent because those fees are not going to go down. We're going to see these fees increasing and increasing and increasing over the years. And we'll find that we're pricing home inspectors out of the industry if we're not real careful with the costs that go into trying to start a business and maintain a business in this very volatile industry.
I see this as not really having a choice.
That's what I was getting ready to say to me.
It's a statutory, and I agree with you. We get hit with tons of fees. You're not even talking about MLS access and super and all that other stuff. We get hit with tons of fees. And if it's a choice, absolutely, I say no. But I don't think we have a choice. Right. My concern is we've had the E&O requirement for 10 years now? Something like that?
This statute was added in 2013.
It was clarified in 2013.
Clarified.
So,
it was required long before that.
2007.
Okay. So
why do we don't need to rush into it?
That's kind of my point. I understand it needs to happen. I get it. But I would like a little bit more time so that we can actually talk more with insurance companies, because we're obviously getting a lot of conflicting data here, where the set of your numbers and the companies that you're talking to are telling you one thing, and I got a number of other inspectors and their companies telling them another thing.
Well, I'd like to just interrupt for just a second. In your packet that you gave us, you have an email from a lady named Janice with Superior Insurance, Inc., and she clearly says, I do not know of any companies selling defense outside limits in Texas.
And they are with through Lloyd's of London.
If that's information that you gathered, then, and she said,
what page are you looking at?
And Lloyd's of London, Science Company, both have costs with so if in
what page are you looking at, Diana?
I just printed it all out.
It's on the bottom.
I'm sorry, 26 and 44. And that's when you asked her to please go back in and recap the answers to your questions.
Yes.
If one of your sources has said that, then I feel like you have conflicting data.
And I discounted Janice's comments because Brett Byland and Ben Garrison also write with Hanover and Lloyd's, and they both told me that defense outside of limits coverage was available from both of those companies.
So how do we know who's correct?
That has to be.
And here's that's kind of my point.
That's
There's a lot of conflict in data. I would like to see that settled before we go too much farther and enforce this on inspectors, especially with renewals that may be coming up in the next 6 months or so, that they start shelling out a bunch of money for a policy that we may not actually need.
Yeah,
If the policy
may not be available.
It may not be available. Yeah.
If the policy is questionably available, it may not be available, or if it is available, it can be changed by the industry at any moment.
And if it isn't available, and we have to do a $250,000 policy with that, then let's make the change to $250,000 policy if that's what makes us in compliance with the statutory regulations. But I don't want to say that we have to do a defense outside limits or this, which we're not really clarifying here. All we're saying is that you have to.
Well, and that's no, and we can certainly hold back on the timing. I'm not opposed to doing that, but the language that we've proposed attempts to accomplish what you're saying, that if you cannot find with your current carrier a defense outside of limits policy, you can satisfy the statutory requirement by increasing the limits on your policy. Either way, all of the agents confirmed that that would be a 10 to 20% increase in the cost of that policy.
It's a $300 increase for me.
Well, and it would vary based on your insurance company. I mean, those are the companies that we contacted, and that's what we were told. So I'm only conveying what we were given, the information that we're given.
History as well, if you've ever had any issues.
On that same page, in that same conversation, the companies tell me the price for $100, $100, and $5,000 deductible will likely increase from 25 by at least 25% if they elect to stay in the market from around $900 to $1,500.
The deductibles that she was quoting was $5,000. Most of the deductibles vary from anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 or even $25,000.
Right, but $900 to $1,500 isn't 10%.
According to her comments, yes, she's saying 25%. The other commenters that we contacted said 10 to 20%. And we said on average. I'm not trying to quibble with you about whether it's 25 or 10, if it's $100 or $500.
That it's only a 10% hit, 10 or 15% hit, when it's really not.
And understand, that's not what I'm trying to convey. Percentages are an inaccurate way of conveying the true cost of the increase. I mean, you may have a $2,000 deductible, and so, or I'm sorry, a $2,000 policy, and your carrier is telling you, well, yes, I can get that for an additional $500, that coverage for you. So that is a 25% increase. Whereas Doyle may have a policy, he's only, for the sake of the example, carrying the statutory minimum, and he's paying $1,000, and his insurance carrier says, hey, I can get you that coverage for $1,100. So it's a 10% increase to Doyle. So.
All right, but along with your percentage, you're saying it's a $100 or $200 increase, which again, you're pushing that number.
Simply
for the statutory minimum.
Simply bringing as much data as she was given and averaging it out. I don't think that we can right now. That's really the biggest thing. We need to determine. My next question is, where does the recovery fund come into all of this? If for instance, had this one case that you have that we don't even have documented anywhere, had that case, let's say it was real, had that case really panned out to where somebody was short the $100,000 after their defense was paid and they needed another 25, could their attorney have come to the recovery fund to pay that other $25,000 shortfall?
They'd had to have had a judgment.
Well, okay.
And it's capped at 12.
It
depends.
12.5, right?
Yes, it depends. They would have to get a judgment against the inspector. They would have to show that the inspector had no recourse, no financial recourse or assets to pay off that judgment. If he had an insurance policy, that insurance policy is supposed to respond and pay that judgment. The recovery fund is a fund of last resort for consumers. So if they had obtained a judgment and say the judgment was for $75,000, but $80,000 of the policy had already been eaten up by the insurance defense costs, or the inspector's defense costs. So there would be $20,000 left to respond to pay that $75,000 judgment. They could still come to the recovery fund and say, look, I've got this judgment for $75,000. All I was able to get from the inspector was $20,000. Can you help me make up that difference? the recovery fund would respond and would be able to contribute towards paying that judgment, but the limit is only $12,500 for a single transaction, which is what most inspection recovery fund claims involve. And this was a choice by the legislature. I mean, it wasn't a choice made by any of the inspectors whenever they enacted the financial responsibility statute. So, I mean, we're left with that legislative choice unless and until we can convince the legislature to change it. There are insurance requirements for brokers on the real estate side. And, you know, other professionals in this industry also carry insurance.
Insurance requirements are for brokers.
Entity brokers where the designated individual broker owns less than
10%, but
they have
not
$1 million. But that's the only requirement.
That's the only requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, most people do carry, but most people, I think even in this industry, most people who are serious about earning a living had some kind of insurance anyway, despite the statutory minimum.
It's kind of my point. It's kind of unique that we're required to have it, but brokers are not.
Well,
Agents
you can take
are
that
required
as a pledge.
Yeah.
So agents aren't required to have
Nope.
insurance?
Not a penny.
Well, then they shouldn't be able to turn on lights and turn on that.
Their recovery fund is substantially higher. And we get a lot more claims against agents and brokers for their recovery fund. It's $50,000 per transaction, per license holder, up to a maximum of $100,000 per license holder.
And recall, we dropped the fees for the inspector recovery fund from $100 to $10.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's because we weren't having any claims. There's no need for money.
Also based on the E&O requirement as well.
Yeah.
So,
And the number of claims we paid out of the recovery fund is just almost non-existent.
We've had only 3 in the last 5 years.
So, you know.
So basically, to summarize, as far as we know, we don't have specific case history for this $100,000 other than you being contacted. And
one additional comment, Janet, the agent with Superior Elite, she mentioned that there was a company, Ace Insurance Company, that no longer writes inspector insurance because she was aware they had to pay out a claim that was well over the policy limit that they wrote. That is just an anecdotal story. I don't know if it is the same lawsuit claim that we were contacted about or not.
Right.
But she did express that story.
So we need to address as a committee how to require inspectors to actually meet in case this ever happened and we were contacted, or these insurance companies contacted us, other than this lawyer that you talked about that you don't even know was involved in that case.
Leaving the lawyer aside, we need to conform our rules to the statutory requirement.
So
I want to make a motion if you don't mind. I think the motion we propose postponement of this approval to the commission until such time that we can verify the availability of policies and the cost incurred to the inspectors.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Barbara?
Aye.
With respect to verification, are you satisfied with email responses from these carriers? Because these carriers live and work all over the country to write insurance.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear, because there was a mention earlier about having them come to the meeting.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if it's email, but I also want to allocate time for
Subcommittee to look, to review.
And for, I can go back to some of the people that have made comments, public comments to us and say, okay, you need to, we have to comply. The other,
Sure.
ask your company how we can comply and give them a little time to make sure everybody's on the same page before we push this through.
I think we have time to substantiate all of these different, definitely
I'm going to get Brett down here
conflicting
because
opinions.
the conversations I've had with Brett, he says he can get it done, but he said wouldn't be surprised if some carries pulled out after the language started getting changed.
And that's what my
So,
carrier was.
I know he says he can get it done now, but he says there's concerns about them pulling out. So I'd like to just, since we're going to have another meeting, just have him come down.
The more
He's
information,
well
we get, the
known,
better.
he teaches classes to home inspectors about insurance, so he has some credibility to him.
Yeah, do you guys care if we take a break before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, so we're going to take a break. It's 11:37, 10 minutes. We're going to bring the meeting back to order. It's 11:47.
I was checking out 5 till 12.
Okay, all right.
Diana, I did have a couple of additional comments that I just wanted to make based on agenda item 7.
Yeah, no, I don't.
The amendments were proposed at the August Commission meeting, so they were published in the Texas Register on August 25th.
Okay.
We have 180 days from the date of publication for the adoption of those amendments. Otherwise, we have to repropose them, and we have to go back through the cycle again. The Commission's February board meeting is set for February 12th to coincide with the Realtor Summit, and that would allow us to adopt amendments at the February meeting because that would fall within those 180 days. Just based on the timing of the Commission's meeting and the publication of the rule proposal. That doesn't always work out that way, but it does this time. And then the other comment I wanted to make is that the agency will be going through the sunset process in 2018 in preparation for the 2019 legislative session. So if in the discussion, it comes up that there is a desire to change the statute, that's certainly something that we could present to the Sunset Commission. But that opportunity won't open until later in 2018. Sunset will be here like April through September.
April through September, and then we'll likely have hearings late
Would it
2019.
be possible for us as an advisory committee to specifically meet with the Sunset?
They'll likely
They
talk.
will likely come to one of the meetings to observe and to talk to members of the inspector committee.
Yeah.
Because they will evaluate as part of their process whether there is still a need for the advisory committee. Because that's kind of
What the Sunset is.
the sunset process, is they're evaluating the processes of the agency and the need for continuation of the agency and all of those processes.
Okay.
So yes, you will definitely get to talk to them.
So if we're within this 180 days from the date of publication, which was, you said, August 25th, then
basically
we'll have some other meetings between now and then.
Well, we're normally having in January.
No, you need one in February because that's when you elect the officers. So it'd have to be early February.
You don't have any other meetings between now and early February?
Not scheduled, but that doesn't mean you can't have one.
No, you can certainly have additional meetings.
But you have to have one in February.
Okay, yeah. Gotcha.
But to be clear, we're going to ask the commission to postpone adoption of this rule
Right,
At the November meeting.
at the next meeting. That's correct.
right.
And give us an opportunity to review, get some data together, and then come back with something. If that can be done within that 180-day period, that's great. If not, then it'll have to be represented and reposted,
Okay.
which would not be a horrible thing.
Well, no, we have options. I just wanted to, it would be nice if we could, within 180 days, come up with something, you know.
Pro or con.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like
Yes,
to put it
exactly.
back
It'd be
to
nice if we could do
legislators.
that.
I would too, I'd love
Have them
to,
fix
but
their own problem.
we're talking
Right.
a year now.
That's not our purview.
Right.
That's a
I'm just
year.
saying I would like to.
I would like to do, but we can't. That's not
And,
what
and we can still
can't
do that regardless of what we do
Sure, right.
with this.
Right, okay.
That may be a list on our sunset committee, the sunset commission, that may be a really good topic, to go off for that, but for our purposes, we have to comply. I think giving us a little more time to make sure the insurance companies, everybody's on the same page and costs, and everybody has a good idea of where they're at, we have to comply.
We just have to, we just have to follow them. We have to have facts. I feel like we just have so much conflicting data. Okay. We probably can't talk about this since we voted. Okay, so agenda item 7.
Don't recall she said a time, but I'm like,
Nothing,
we're fine.
Okay, so we've completed agenda item 7. Agenda item 8, discussion and possible action regarding posting photos from home inspections on social media. And I guess what we're gonna look into whether there's any rules or from the real estate commission that says what we can and can't do. I know we did have some feedback from Mr. Cahill. Staging and
Facebook is half of my Facebook.
Well, those realtors don't have the permission, contractual permission.
That would be the difference.
Or in the listing, when you sign a listing agreement, you're allowing persons to come in to take pictures. No, it's pretty much open house on that. You can actually specify in the MLS if a buyer or buyer lady is allowed to take video or take pictures, stuff like that. If it says no, it's a whole different story. But I think for our terms of what we're talking about, if you're posting somebody's address or their name and personal information, fine. They're going to go after you outside the commission anyway. Plus, probably go after for privacy issues.
But so there's nothing in our standards of practice or our legal and ethics that even goes to any kind of control
This
over
is
that.
something that's grown out of shape.
Yeah.
It was never thought of.
What is the intent? What is the intent of putting a picture or something like that? Is it for education purposes or is it to make things look bad? All those things can go in. If that's a lawsuit, that's somebody's different. I don't think we use. I would just start someone covered under our ethics. Yeah. And I don't think we as a TREIC body should start running what we do.
I know that some home inspectors will have a page or whatever, funny things they've found. They'll post that. Cinder block where broken stuff was, or a funny looking mailbox or something. And those are the privacy issues we're discussing now. We shouldn't be doing that, but it helps them to gain foothold in the social environment that we're in today.
But you have the argument of whose privacy you really violate. If you're putting somebody's address, if the address is on the mailbox, okay, I could possibly see that. But a step, it could be anybody's step, where you really violating somebody's privacy.
Well, nobody knows where you were that day,
Right.
unless you post a picture of the front of the
Or
house.
unless you tag your location on the
Right.
I'm saying, there's those
Remove
things.
the GPS embedded in the picture and the date and time.
But that's best to not post anything, but.
So really, there's not much more we want to discuss on item 8.
If you had talked previously about possibly putting something on the inside. I know that there's not anything enforceable necessarily, but I think if you wanted to, as a chair or if someone else wanted to write something just about kind of, why, be careful or why this is an issue type of thing, that would be a way at least to get people aware of it out there.
I agree.
Because the only issue, or the only rule where it even touches upon this, doesn't mention social media, is going to be in your professional conduct and ethics rule, where that requires you to deal with the public in a manner that promotes professionalism of the industry. Now, from our enforcement folks, I don't know that they would have necessarily grounds for enforcement. If people were posting things on social media, I'm not sure that we would go after them for violating
It's more general language. And
professionalism.
it's ethics. It's not necessarily a black or white issue.
Yeah, it's like if I have a water heater they use a garden hose, it's the supply line.
Right.
You know, and I have to put that on social media. Hey, this is not the right way to do it. You know, you've got to use the right materials and whatnot. Most people aren't going to worry about it. But if I say, hey, this house on Johnson Street in Mesquite did this, that's a whole different.
Yeah.
They only did it on the discharge side.
And there may be people like the gentleman that you brought to our attention last time that just wasn't really thinking or not aware of it. And if you put something in the inside, it might make people think twice about why are they posting this? Is this really a legitimate reason to do it? That sort of thing.
Right.
So
So I think that'll, I never did get around to that.
that's okay. I was just suggesting it as a possible way to
It's
get.
a good topic, and yeah, you're right. We should do a corner, things not to do.
Well, and the remedy for individuals who suffer damages is to file a lawsuit in the courts.
Right, exactly.
But what you have found in addition to, or since the advent of social media, is that a lot of states have adopted what they call citizen participation acts that protect individuals from posting things on social media and extend and broaden those protections under the First Amendment. Texas has one of these acts, the Texas Citizens Participation Act, and if somebody files suit against an individual or a company for something that is written or posted on social media, or even in perhaps a performance evaluation, and they are sued, then the defendant can file what is called an anti-SLAPP motion that basically gets the lawsuit thrown out of court pretty quickly unless the plaintiff has specific evidence of actual malice and damages and the other elements to establish their cause of action, whether it be for defamation, libel, or slander. And the courts have spoken, including the Texas Supreme Court. They issued a ruling that basically found that ExxonMobil was not liable for information they put in a performance review of one of their employees. And the lawsuit was tossed out under this Texas Citizens Participation Act.
Okay, so I think that we will move on from this topic. I believe that. Thank you very much, Kristen. That's really helpful, and that's actually a good item to use in the insight articles. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 9, discussion and possible action regarding 535-220 professional conduct and ethics.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
This was added, Ms. Strand had sent an email to us that was forwarded to you, and you had asked us to put it, you asked us to put it on the agenda for discussion.
Yeah, I thought he would be here. I guess he didn't come. Yeah, this is what he went to try to discuss with the commission directly. And his question, let me go back. Hang on, I'm sorry.
Could he put the proper screws in the dead front?
Can he do it? If he is repairing, it's what it sounds like, a safety item while he's doing an inspection. Does that fall, or does that fall under whether we're not allowed to do repairs on a property within a year of doing an inspection?
You can't fix anything.
You can't fix anything.
Well, apparently he teaches, doesn't he? Isn't he an instructor?
You can fix anything you want as long as you don't charge for it.
Right.
Is that true? Is that really the line we're looking at? Because I've tightened doorknobs before, and I thought to myself I shouldn't do that.
Can I file a complaint?
I've said on my house.
I understand.
I charge myself for it.
Eddie's saying that they took one of the screws out, and if they put one of the screws in, they violated the standards.
Fixing the defect, repairing the house.
Repairing the defect.
Yeah,
If he's not being paid for it, I agree with you, then it should not be an issue.
It's not an issue, it's a
Especially if he
non-issue.
was gonna truck himself if he put it back in.
Well, you know, it might be good for him.
So is the intent of this rule based on compensation or doing repairs?
Based on time.
I believe the compensation, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I believe the compensation is the triggering factor.
Something related to repair.
I think the purpose was you didn't want inspectors going in saying, this is wrong. By the way, I have a contracting service, I can fix all this.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
The
it was
intent
about.
of what that's exactly.
No, that's what it is.
Yeah. Now, if I have a panel that's got pointed tip screws on it, I'm going to look behind where it is. If I can put those screws back in, it's fine. If I can't, I'm going to leave it out and I'm going to send an email to the listener and say, hey, I left these screws out or I left the panel cover out and you can let your client know because this is a safety concern.
You wouldn't just move the wires out of the way, put it back together.
It depends on if it's one of those federal pacific where everything's put together. You know, it's just one of those.
Well, he also said that he's repaired flue pipes on water heaters, and I'm assuming he's talking about on the roof because he brought the roof, like doing it on the roof, like after a storm or something, and that it's going to cause damage to the property if he doesn't repair it or something.
Well, I think a lot of times those pipes get knocked off.
Yeah.
The roof is always replaced.
Yeah, when they replace the roof.
He's putting it back on so that continues to cause.
As long as he's doing it and not charging, he's not in violation.
Yeah.
He's not in violation, but, okay, so I personally don't think it's a good idea to change a property from the time that you were there, because we were just talking about leaving stuff on. Well, now you're talking about repairing somebody's deficiencies that you're there to write up to begin with. And if it's a health and safety hazard, I believe we're required, if it's gas leak or, you know, something that could cause a fire, or that we're required to report that immediately, either to the seller or the agents or to somebody, everyone, so that they can remedy that in a hurry, not, you know, after the option period is up or whatever. So, you know, as a practice, what he's saying to do probably isn't a good idea business-wise, but.
I can say from an enforcement standpoint, I think the way it is better. I mean, encouraging it, I mean, it sounds like he's like he wants some sort of blessing. I mean,
right.
A lot of things can happen wrong. You may tighten something and something else loosens and causes a water leak or whatever. I mean,
you over-tighten it and it breaks.
Yes. I mean, we have in the past we have disciplined a few people that were overzealous on some stuff and caused major damage to the property, and they're doing it within the scope of the inspection, so that is negligence. So I usually caution people, I mean, it's a visual, it's an observation format. You observe the deficiency, you report it, and obviously, like you said, if it's imminent to the safety of the people in the house, you have that departure procedure to go through.
I mean, and that would be my question, could you review our obligation to be proactive on an item that is a safety hazard with the occupants? I know we're allowed to communicate with them, or are we required to?
You're not required to, it's within your discretion. I mean, you could loosen that up, I mean, that's the only way I would.
So if I, as a professional, I mean, the question is, what obligation do I have if I find a flue that's disconnected in the attic, and it's a winter, they're running the water heater or whatever it is, do I have a professional legal obligation to do something about it?
I'd say argument could probably be in the conduct and ethics.
I mean, I'm a professional in my profession.
I don't have the wording of the rule in front of me. I don't know if it says may or must inform or something.
I think everything more the conduct and ethics.
I've got 220 up here. Which rule? Yeah, which rule are you talking about?
When they get apart.
Apart from.
I think it's the responsibility of the right agency to lay
It depends on whether it's an imminent safety issue or not.
It says may disclose, observe, imminent safety hazard.
The fire and fire's agent. I'm going to call the fire department.
I've seen some bad ones, gushers, that I've had.
Inspectors at their discretion may disclose, observe.
Let them deal with it.
So what he's really specifically asking is, can he do the repairs without getting in trouble? Well,
You can absolutely permission.
There's not anything prohibiting him from doing it, but there are, as you mentioned, and other people at the table have mentioned, there are other considerations involved when you move forward with something like that.
But his examples of changing the screws on a dead front, he's certainly not in violation.
If he's not charging for it.
Yeah.
Right.
and fixing flue pipe, repairing flue pipes and.
If he's doing enough to do some of those things, that's fine.
I charge $800 for the inspection and I tighten screws.
Well, then you're charging for it.
I'm charging, I'm being paid to be there. Now, the question is doing something like that.
So my free termite report really isn't free because I roll it into the.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so that question is answered.
Okay.
So moving,
The answer to him,
the answer to him is that if he is not charging to do any repairs and he chooses to do that as his business practice, he's not in trouble with TREIC and there's no rule against it. It's simply a business decision as to whether it's a good idea.
Now,
There is no rule violation.
I do want to say that Mike did point out that if doing something, if he does something as negligent, then yeah, he causes more damage, then there is something for us to, for the agency to go after, but.
Well, I can just say that he caused the damage, and I could come back and say later that they did do it, even though he did it. So it's like, why even put yourself in that position in the first place?
Again, other considerations to think about when you start doing that kind of stuff.
Technically, if your policy is not to make repairs, period, then you're going to stay out of the hot water.
Leave the house how you found it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you'll be fine.
That's why you're there to report
And
conditions.
if there's an imminent harm, if the rule says they may get rid of that confidentiality they have with the client and then report it. So,
Right.
yeah,
So if it's a safety.
carbon dioxide's pumping into the attic, that's obviously a concern in the winters.
Right.
You could put the, vent it back out, but you should probably still inform them that happened. Because it could come off easily.
It could come off again, even if.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, yeah.
But it happens a lot in areas, especially this last year, we had storms. The roofers go out there, they are so quick on there, and they bump against those flues, and they never go in the house, they never go in the attic, so they don't know that they disconnected it. It happens all the time.
A lot of time that new roof that goes on, they slide that thing right back down after slide it up, and you got your disconnection. It's strapped properly.
When it falls all the way down to the roof, you know it's probably not connected properly.
Yeah.
Or it's sitting right there.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not supposed to do that?
So agenda item 10, which is a request for future meeting agenda items.
Have that one item we talked about earlier.
Right. Is there any other requests for future meeting agenda items?
The insurance issue, and the follow-up on the education question,
Right.
the course
Oh, yeah,
timing.
that's right.
So I have 3 items.
And then we can, as it gets closer, we can always add agenda items if something doesn't go that one comes up.
What's on the calendar for February for the commission?
The 12th, is that what you said, Chris?
That's a commission meeting.
And then,
That just
okay.
leaves you 2 possible dates.
So then, agenda item 11, discussion of future meeting dates. And Tony brought up that we meet again in February.
The next time we have to,
Right.
we can meet before that.
You may want to meet before February to talk about the insurance issue.
The only thing you have to meet,
February meeting.
the only thing you have to have a February meeting for is for election of officers, because so you could actually have a more substantial meeting prior to that, and then meet in February to just have 1 or 2 agenda items, one of them being the election of officers.
I can't do the election in January, nope, it has to be February.
It's by rule, it's February meeting.
How many?
We did a mid-January to go over the insurance stuff and see what we accomplished.
That'll give us time to get some feedback.
How many days do we need between our meeting and the commission meeting? Commission meeting is on 12th, right?
Well, yeah, just depending on what, what do we say, how many days, at least 10? Or we need more than that?
Well, the commission agenda will be posted by February 1st.
Oh.
So you'll need
Okay.
to meet before then to let the commission know what we're going to do on that.
And the other thing I might add is with the February meeting, that's the meeting where people can get CE credit for attending.
Oh, okay.
How many hours is that?
2, up to 2.
Only 2 I've got so far.
So that is another consideration. So we just those out in the past, we have had a late February meeting where you've elected the officers then. So I'm not saying that you need to do that, but just because of the time frame, in terms of the insurance stuff, Kristen's right. We should meet prior to February to do that.
Because this is a holiday, but how come you guys are, isn't Columbus Day a holiday?
It's not a state holiday.
Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh,
January 8th?
okay, January 8th.
Until we start turning the Columbus.
No, MLK is
Today is Columbus Day, yes.
January 8th.
It's a school
10 o'clock.
It's a school, January 8th at 10 a.m. Does that work for
Isn't that
everybody?
Elvis's birthday? I think that's Elvis's birthday. The 8th. Elvis's.
Oh,
To the standards of
you
practice.
can't be here.
No, I could be here. I just need to be dressed like Elvis when I come in. Elvis, or January 8th, I think is Elvis's birthday.
We'll have to dress like that. We have credit for that.
Okay, so January 8th, 10 a.m., and if there's any subcommittee meetings before that, they'll be.
So the SOP committee wanted to meet prior to the next, so do you want to meet on January 8th as well at 9? Okay. Right.
And what about the education committee or enforcement? Anybody else want to meet?
Is anything on education?
I think
committee's
the
plate?
enforcement should meet the same day at 9 o'clock.
Well, I thought some of you guys had.
Don't have to sit outside.
Oh, okay. What about education? Anything going on with them?
I don't think, there's not any.
We're good as far as education, as far as I know.
So we'll assume that the standards of practice will meet at 9, and then the full committee will meet at 10 a.m. Okay.
Did you want to set the February meeting too, just because calendars tend to fill up
Yes.
quickly?
And the February, we said, well, somehow I wrote down February 12th, but I think that's.
That's the commission meeting. Again, you guys have met after the commission meeting. If there wasn't anything, if you deal with all the, the other stuff in the rule that we could make a proposal in January, you have met in February to elect officers after the commission meeting. You've done that in the past.
And
On the 19th, because that's.
we can't meet on the 9th because that's the summit.
Towards the end of the month is good.
Or which one are you talking about?
Our February.
February
Oh,
9th.
The 8th or the 9th?
Both.
The 8th, well.
The 8th is the
8th.
board meeting, and the 9th is the real
It
estate
could be the
summit.
end of the month, but we don't even set that now.
What about the 26th? Monday. Is that good for all the staff?
I don't have anything on my calendar right now.
Maybe a birthday or.
No.
Okay, so let's go ahead and set that for the 26th, and that'll be when we elect officers. And I know we're still missing one public member, but are there anybody?
February 26th.
It's coming up. I'll have to look off the top of my head. I don't know, but I know that we're in a cycle, so someone may be up. I don't know though.
Everybody's fairly new or.
Public's only on 2 years.
Okay, well, and you just got reappointed, so.
The 2 public members just got reappointed in this past February.
Yeah, and then I think Brad and I are the only ones going on 19, right? February 19th.
How difficult would it be to get the public member to stay on for a longer term?
It's just up to them. The reason it used to be the same term as the inspector members, but we couldn't get public members to commit to that, and they would drop off in the mid. So we reduced it to 2, and then asked them then we ask them every 2 years if they want to re-up.
And so we still have the one empty position anyway, as we are, and we don't have anybody that's.
No, and the problem with that is even though if we make announcements in the insight, that's not really, that's going to inspectors. I mean, we want to encourage inspectors if they know somebody or real estate agents or anybody, but that's not the target. You need to find some of the public who's interested in this, who wants to serve on the committee, and it's not always the best way to get somebody, but if you guys know anybody.
Well, we'll
Maybe we can ask the engineers.
It would be nice to have, a full committee.
I know somebody who might be willing to do it. There was something standing in their way, it's not anymore, so they might want to do it.
Well, thank you very much to all the TREIC staff. We really appreciate all your help and all the research you do for us. And everybody who's attending on our online streaming.
Yeah, streaming is, hopefully this went okay. I know we had a couple of hiccups, but.
I had a question. So on this new system, can you tell public people that are watching or streaming? Do you have any idea? Like before, we could tell when people called in or.
I don't know. I might be able to. This is so new to me. I don't know. I think we can probably get some.
Usually when we had this with the old system, when we went through, we had also asked who else was on the line, and you might find.
Yeah. I think we can get probably afterwards find out how many people are watching. But I'm sure we can tell before the meeting. I just don't know how to do that. But I know we can probably. I'll get the information and send it out to you guys to see how we did. I hope people listen. I mean, we had some interest in this meeting.
There were several.
Oh, really?
In the past, we even had discussion from the public.
Yeah, that's going to change if we go this route, because we just can't manage people watching the stream and interacting. They need to be here if they want to participate.
What about executive session? If we were to go in executive session, how that would relate to stream? If there's a committee member that's streaming, can you?
Oh yeah, no, that's a separate. There's a separate. So there's the actual video conferencing section of it, and then the streaming section. They're two separate things. We could turn the streaming section off and continue to have a meeting if we needed to.
All right.
Okay. Well, it is 12:18, and we will adjourn.